Hey everyone, just wanted to join you with a quick look at the markets today. I'm joined by my colleague over at 76 Research, Rob Horton, and we're looking at a market that stumbled a little bit. You get the Dow off 257 points. You get the S&P down a bit, about a quarter of a percentage point, closing out the day at 5,712. NASDAQ dropping a little bit, 0.3%. What does this tell us, right? What does this mean? Can you read anything broader into this? I, for one, and I know Rob as well, have been looking at the poly market signals. You saw some weakness over the weekend, in part maybe because of the Iowa poll that came out. Rob, I want to go to you. I don't know if there's a tremendous amount, which is not a great way to lead a show, right? That you can glean from the markets at this point in time, other than, look, I think that Wall Street's sort of betting on a Trump win, and maybe they're just hesitant ahead of that. I mean, I understand being hesitant. I understand saying, okay, let's wait and see how this all shakes out, because it may affect the regulatory and tax environment for a variety of companies, not to mention the economy.
I agree. I think the last few days, the last few trading sessions, we've had some, particularly as the poly market readings were kind of shifting in the direction of Harris. That happened, late last week. And we saw the same signs of strength in the market that were, associated with Trump doing well. They started to kind of ebb back. So we had a few percentage points off the S&P 500, Bitcoin, which I think is a pretty good barometer of sentiment around the election. Bitcoin a week or so ago had reached more or less all-time highs, and now is backing off, just a bit. So there is some trepidation, but I think we've also seen a little bit of a bounce in those poly market odds. They reached a low of like 53% over the weekend, now back to 59%. So Trump is still favored in the betting markets, probably still perceived as the likely winner in the financial markets, or as reflected by prices in the financial markets. But we'll find out possibly tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, we'll see when we find out.
Yeah, no, we're getting that sort of word. People were asking me, what do you think? And I'm like, look, if it were the old days, I'd say, sure, of course you're going to find out tomorrow. But this is just such a close election. And I think that, the big reality here is that people are dug in, right, on either side. So in the old days, maybe, they wouldn't wait around and say, okay, we have to collect every single last ballot. But then again, I don't know if we've had anything quite this close before. I go back to Florida and Hanging Chads in the year 2000. That was pretty close. And sure enough, yes, like both sides dug in. We could very, very possibly be, in a scenario like that. I don't count that out. Or maybe when you look at, for example, the Marist poll that came out today showing independents up, he's up by 7 with independents. He's down nationally in their poll, but he's up by 7 points with independents. I think that's kind of interesting, because if it's going to be decided by independents, obviously you want to be up in that category, and he's up over her. So, it's hard to know with these polls. I mean, one of the things I think is so remarkable about him as a candidate and him in this point in time in history is that pollsters just can't get this right.
Yeah,
Which is perhaps why we go back to the markets.
Yeah, I mean, the Iowa, well, there are big questions about whether the polls are really, the quality of information coming out of these polls. And I think the Iowa poll kind of reflects that, because it's really not a state that's in play. And then you have a so-called, reputable pollster indicating Trump's behind, and it's inconsistent with all the other polls, and it's kind of implausible. So to me, that one just kind of casts doubt on the whole exercise of polling. I'm more interested in this early voting data, because that's actual real data. And one thing that's really striking to me is that overall, it seems that early votes are 20% lower versus 2020. So, in 2020, we had the COVID rules and massive mail-in, ballots. A lot of those have been unwound. And, where we are relative to where we were a few days out in 2020, it's something like 20% fewer ballots cast overall, which I think is probably favorable for Trump.
If you
And maybe
combine
that's
that data
helping.
point with the reality that the Trump campaign has done a pretty significant job of trying to close that gap in places like Pennsylvania, even Virginia, when I look at the increase in the number of ballots requested by conservatives in the state of Virginia vis-a-vis what we're seeing from Democrats. Granted, Democrats still have a lock on mail-in ballots in Virginia, but the fact that you've seen this big uptick in Virginia, that they've narrowed the gap, I think the spread was somewhere well over 600,000, a difference between the number of mail-in ballots that would come from Democrats versus Republicans. And now they've narrowed that to around 200,000. So, and change. Don't quote me for exact on those numbers, but it's pretty sizable. It's pretty massive. So if you're suddenly seeing this many more conservative ballots coming in, and you're combining that with the fact that there's lower overall volume, I mean, it seems to me you add those two things together and the advantage does go to Trump.
Yeah, significantly lower, not only more registered Republicans voting early, but fewer registered Democrats voting early versus 2020.
Yeah.
That's, 2020 was a very anomalous election. You had COVID. Voter participation rates were like the highest since 1960. Just an enormous number of votes were cast with these mail-in ballot procedures. And it seems like we're not going to get anywhere near that just based on the early voting, unless it's compensated for with, day of voting. But, if you're going to have large day of voting, that would probably favor Republicans who, tend to prefer day of voting relative to Democrat voters.
I'm looking at my friend Charlie Kirk. He's tweeting out something about, men have to vote, men have to vote. We're not seeing enough in terms of men voting. And there's some fear, should I say, that you may not get enough day of turnout in the state of Pennsylvania, because I think it's all going to come down to Pennsylvania. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to slice it. And I know that you being the mathematician that you are, I mean, even though we normally talk about stocks, I know that you've looked at the map and you've looked at all the pathways forward. Nate Silver over at the Silver Bulletin has 40,000 different ways to get to 270 in his models. So
Yeah.
when it's all said and done, I mean, doesn't it really kind of at this point seem as though Pennsylvania is the linchpin? It comes down to Pennsylvania. So if men don't show up in Pennsylvania to vote, that could be kind of an issue. Obviously,
well, I would just say
you got to vote.
I was somewhat alarmed by that Charlie Kirk post too, and I looked at it. I mean, it does seem, in terms of male participation in mail-in voting, that's what he was looking at now versus 2020. It's very similar. So it's not as if there's been like a deterioration for whatever reason. It was like the same ratio, but he has every right to kind of make sure that men do show up and express themselves in the ballot booth. But you're right. I mean, look, I think it's very likely that, when you look at Polymarket, you look at polls, it seems like Trump will probably win these Sunbelt states, North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia, and potentially Nevada. Although when you do the math, Nevada is actually not that relevant. So it comes down to the three blue wall states, and Pennsylvania might be his best shot. But, Wisconsin also, the edge in Polymarket and the polls seems to go slightly, but it's close to 50-50. So he just has to win one of those three. She has to win all of those three.
I mean, that's what's amazing.
But so just think,
go ahead.
So just probabilistically, it's like, let's just take two, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. If each are 50-50, if there's true 50-50 odds for Harris to win each of those states, that means she has a 25% chance of winning the election and he has a 75% chance. Right.
Okay, so that's an interesting point, because then I go back to, why is Nate only sort of predicting, and I guess we'd have to have Nate answer that, but he's got like a 53% chance of him winning, and then you've got Polymarket at somewhere around a 50, maybe they're up to 58% chance of winning. But I mean, if you're just looking at the pure raw statistics, to your point, like, it's Pennsylvania and Wisconsin with the 50-50 thing, it just starts, whittling away. When you don't have as many pathways forward, then your odds, I would think, would be reduced.
Yeah. And I'm making a simplifying assumption there that North Carolina, there's no risk that he loses any of those Sunbelt states. So that would kind of whittle
You're
down the
assuming
odds.
North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona
Arizona,
all go
it,
to Trump
yeah, and
in that scenario. Okay.
you actually don't even have to take Nevada in that. He can lose Nevada as long as he wins one of the blue wall states. He'll marginally win. Another
What
interesting
about New
scenario.
Hampshire? Just curious because
I was going
I've
to say
seen,
that.
yeah, I mean, I've seen some polling data on New Hampshire. They didn't like her back in 2020 at all. She had a miserable showing in the Democrat Party, and she actually dropped out of the New Hampshire primary after that. They didn't respond well at all to her attack on Joe Biden. I mean, up one side and down the other there in the Democratic debate where she tried to effectively position him as a racist. And yeah, I mean, it was like quite an attack. And it was all anybody was talking about. And New Hampshire voters responded extremely negatively to her and to that attack. They like Biden there. They just do. I grew up in New Hampshire. Like, I have a big history with the state. I understand it. It's changed a lot because you have a lot of people from Massachusetts coming in, moving in, taking advantage of the 0% income tax and the 0% sales tax. Win-win. But, so yeah, it's changing, but there's still a core demographic there that is very anti-establishment, anti-big government. And so I'm watching it because in recent days, weeks, it looks like that actually has a shot at getting flipped back to red territory. What do you think?
Yeah. And JD was just up there speaking. So they're investing in it and they're paying attention. Here's the math. If Trump wins Nevada, and he can lose all three blue wall states. If he wins New Hampshire, he wins the election. So New Hampshire could be
say that again. So he can, what was your point on Nevada? If he wins Nevada
and those other,
Sun belts,
swings, the Sun Belt, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, then if he wins New Hampshire, he does not have to win the three Midwestern states. He can lose those three states and marginally in I guess another assumption there is like those like little split districts in Maine and Nebraska go as expected, right? Because now we're getting down to a very
well. I mean,
I
think per some models, something like a 0.4% chance at 269 tie, which means you're really starting to get down to. I think in that case, is it Nebraska that suddenly becomes really important? Well, and Congress.
That split district, right? But it's interesting, though. New Hampshire and Polymarket is not 0% chance of.
I was just actually looking at that. So when I look at the odds, I mean, look, wow, he's back up to 60% right now. Guys, that's so he is rallying. He is rallying, and she's actually in a slight decline right now. Whoa, this is moving. I wonder if I can, let's see if we can show it in real time. This is like a dress rehearsal for tomorrow night, because tomorrow night, Rob and I will be live here on 76 Research, as well as the Trish Regan channel. So make sure that you subscribe. Do us that favor, subscribe to the channel. We will have live coverage of everything right here with you. And we'll be going out to some of there's a big convention, obviously, in West Palm Beach. Donald Trump expected to speak, so we'll be taking that live for you, and we'll be looking at all of these numbers as they come in. So let me see if I can show you again what I'm looking at here, and let's give it a shot. We're going to go to the computer here. How about that, Rob? Do you see what I just did?
Well done.
So, like I said, a good little dress rehearsal. Okay, so I'm looking at 59.7. So he's up 4.5. She's down 4.4. And this is it was at least on my phone, moving in real time. So that's very interesting. If you look at the expectation, the markets, and I'm citing these because these are prediction markets and they're kind of worth keeping an eye on, guys, because it's real money on the line. And I just always find that really compelling and really interesting to watch for. You can probably expect that we're going to see these spreads narrow as we get closer to tomorrow. But look at these swing states, Rob. Pennsylvania, which is 19 electoral votes, they're predicting nearly a 60% chance. Georgia, you were just talking about Georgia and the Sun Belt, 66% chance of Trump there. Arizona, 75% chance. Wow.
Which is almost as high as you get anywhere, even in very clearly red states. So Arizona seems fine. I mean, I take, when the numbers are that high in some of these swing states, you could kind of make an assumption that they'll go one way or another.
Okay. The popular vote, forget about it for him. I don't think, I mean, that's pretty compelling. 72% chance of Harris winning the popular vote.
Trish, I was thinking about the popular vote with him around 28, 30%. I mean, that's saying there's like a 1 in 3 chance he wins the popular vote. If he wins the popular vote, then it's a landslide victory. So it's just kind of interesting to calibrate what the market's saying. The market's saying there's like a 28% chance of a real landslide, because that's what a popular vote victory for Trump means in terms of the Electoral College.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So looking at this map here, the expectation is the Northeast, where you and I live, is going to be really, really blue. But the fact that New Hampshire is now light blue is very interesting. You look at that blue wall area, and they've got Pennsylvania in light red, of course. Michigan, Wisconsin still in light blue. I mean, this is really, I mean, it's like most of the country. Look at that. It's like red everywhere. It kind of like sums it up, right? Like you're like, because, we live in the Northeast, outside the New York metropolitan area. And it's like, it's a very different place than, say, what you see down in Georgia or Florida or Texas or Oklahoma. And Georgia's still pink, right? It's not full on red. So South Carolina, I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasm for Trump elsewhere in the country. It's just these darn coasts.
Well, what's even more fascinating is if you ever look at those maps where they just show it on a county level.
Yeah.
And you zoom into these coastal states at the county level, it's even more pinpointed, where the
Sorry, I think I lost you for a second. It's more pinpointed, right? At the county level. Well, that's, and there's some gerrymandering and all that kind of stuff that goes on, let's face it. And people are worried about that, understandably. But I just think this is kind of amazing to see. Are you back with me, Rob?
Can you hear me?
I got you. I think we're going to put you live in the studio tomorrow night. So I won't be talking remotely with you, although sort of remotely, because we have some different shots set up. Again, just a reminder, everybody subscribe to the channel so you know when we're live tomorrow night. We're starting at 7 o'clock, both here on the 76 Research channel as well as on the Trish Regan channel there on YouTube. So make sure that you tune in. It's really, really going to be interesting. Okay, interesting. Now, the hope is, look, either way, that you get kind of a landslide, because I think that we want to put to bed some of the anxiety out there. And yet, look, we've been through this movie before, right? In 2000. And Hillary Clinton has said over and over again, I mean, going as far back as 2020, I think she regretted giving up in 16. She said, look, Biden, if it's close, whatever you do, don't give up. And so I'm sure the same advice is being given to Kamala Harris. Now, you don't hear her talking about it. You only hear everybody saying, oh, Trump is never, ever going to concede. But I mean, I also wonder, like, if it's close, does she concede? Is she going to hang on for dear life for Pennsylvania?
Yeah, and I think, with respect to the markets, that's another thing that I think investors are considering, is not just who wins, but what if it's ambiguous? What if it's contested? What if this leads to a situation in the United States? And, when I look at the gold price and gold kind of reaching basically at all-time highs, a lot of factors are driving up gold, but it wouldn't completely surprise me if some of it was investor positioning, for this kind of tail risk scenario where we really have a fiasco in the most important country, in the most important economy in the world. Gold would do well in, when things are bad politically and there's instability, gold does well. So not to get too,
it's sad to think about it. Yeah, but that's sort of, I hear you. Partly what's going on. Again, looking at all these maps, and this is not that dissimilar from some of the other prediction markets. That's important to note too, before, we say, okay, well, we're going to this one prediction market. I'm seeing a similar story with these 60-40 odds, kind of no matter where you go. What do you think the significance of that is?
Well, I think that, it's a free market, so it's like these arbitrage principles apply, right? If I'm a gambler or an investor, and I can lock in odds in one venue, that are disconnected from another, I can kind of lock in risk-free profits. So, they all kind of have to mesh at some level. Otherwise, there's free money on the table, and I'm sure there's people out there playing these things.
Well, look at Michigan. So the Michigan thought here is that it's going to go to Kamala, and she's way ahead in Michigan, more than she is in the actual polls. I mean, look at that, 62% chance of Kamala Harris taking Michigan.
Yeah, some Michigan's. I don't know what kind of data people are responding to, but it seems to be going her way. I'd be curious if you can go to New Hampshire. I just
You
wonder
got it.
how.
Home state, live free or die. Okay, we're going over to New Hampshire, everyone. And look at that. That's pretty significant. 83%, 84% chance now
Yeah, yeah,
of her.
yeah, but still, you know what I mean.
I know a lot of Democrats in New Hampshire. If he wins New Hampshire, I don't know if they're going to be able to get out of bed the next day. I mean, which is what's sad, right? Because everything is so tribal right now, and one hopes that we elect a new president and can put all that behind us. But for some reason, I don't think it's really going away. So yeah, the expectation. But New Hampshire's a small state. I don't know if people are really paying attention to it the way they should. It's very different in the south part of New Hampshire, the southern part of the state, which is more influenced by Boston, say, than in the northern part of the state. But as you would have it, the majority of the population is in the south. So you're talking about Manchester, Nashua, the Portsmouth area, which is my home territory. I mean, that's where the bulk of the population is. You start getting up into Bretton Woods territory. You wonder why I like to talk about gold and Bretton Woods 2.0 so much. And, that's a tiny little town, and there's lots of little tiny towns up there. And I think the northern part of New Hampshire has more in common, if you would, with the rest of the country when we talk about, the deep south and the Midwest and other parts that are just purely red. So we'll see.
Yeah, and look, 18%. That's not 60%, but it's not zero. I mean, it's a long shot, but it could be decisive, right? I mean, when you think of its relevance in the context of the whole map. So
going back out to Pennsylvania, he's showing some strength there. He's been rallying. If people can see what I'm looking at, so if you look at this chart, he was up as high as 63%, it looks like, and then has come down, but yet just rallied a little bit within the last, I want to say even just within the last several hours here, now back at 59%. And this is really, I think, Rob, what is dictating the rest of what we're looking at, right? Because when you go to Pennsylvania and then you go back to this map here and you see what the pathways are, I mean, Pennsylvania is super important, and I think really is part of what's contributing to this. Now it's 60%. As we started this show, it was in the 50s, but 60% chance of Trump winning.
Yeah, it's interesting how Pennsylvania and the national outcome are so, kind of moving in lockstep. It really is the most, the most important state. But, I guess, there is a chance of Wisconsin, and he just needs one of those three in most of these scenarios. So, look, that's 57-43 is not, that's kind of close. And if you,
Yes. I mean, I would have thought it would have been good. It's just so interesting because, again, you look at the polls, and we've been all through the New York Times Siena poll that just came out, and everything's neck and neck. And then you come over here and you just have such a wider berth here. People, I guess part of it's that you want to be decisive. You're making a bet on one or the other, so you have to pick someone.
Yeah. And look, I mean, Wisconsin, he did quite well. I mean, he obviously won it, originally, and then it was a very narrow loss in the prior election. So it's a state that, he does well in. So I mean, look, all of this kind of comes down to how good are these polls? Do they really have their finger on the pulse, or so I think there's just tremendous uncertainty kind of in each of these close states.
Yeah, I
And
hear you.
you
Right.
know, and you look back at prior experiences, and Wisconsin was very tight, and a lot
I'm,
of stuff has moved in Trump's direction this time around.
I'm laughing because Peace of Mind is tuned in. Peace of Mind, good to see you. He's one of my frequent viewers, or she. I don't know because Peace of Mind just has a kitty cat. As but Peace of Mind making the point that about Wisconsin, which we just hit on, and I do think that Wisconsin's going to be big. Diane pointing out over on Facebook that unions are big in Michigan, and maybe that'll have something to do with. But you look at the union voter, and the union voter is not going the way you would just anticipate the union voter would go, right? I mean, you look at the Teamsters poll, for goodness sakes, 70% of them want Trump, only 30% are voting for Kamala Harris. So I don't think you can count on that union vote as being so deep blue as it historically has been.
You also have the question marks around the Arab American population in Michigan, which has recently, expressed support actually. And it kind of goes back to her whole decision to, you know, bypass Shapiro as her vice president choice, and which would have been very
Really,
helpful.
really, really dumb move. I mean, it's great for Trump, but I can't believe that. Like, that was one where I just was like, I guess because she thought it would hurt her in Michigan, but I don't think it would
But
have.
here we are, and Trump has somehow actually succeeded in getting support from the groups that you wouldn't think he'd have support from.
Exactly, exactly. So, I think that was a big mistake. I think that a very popular governor in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, was kind of her ticket, and she blew that one up. Which
Yeah,
just
not only a popular governor, but maybe I'm not saying I'm a fan of his, but he's sharp and with it, and might be one of the stronger Democrats out there for the future in terms of
well,
being a
apparently
standard
that's why
bearer.
she didn't like him. Apparently, he was
Well,
taking all the oxygen out of the room. That was part of it, I am told. And that's sort of through the grapevine. The other reason that she may have not gone with him was her fear about what that would mean for the base in her party. And she did not want to anger them because, look, the Israel thing is really touchy. I want to play some sound for you and for the viewers. I played it earlier on my show today. And Rob, this is of Erin Burnett on her program, and Erin brought up the fact that Kamala seems to have a different message, if you would, depending on where she is. So they've been running commercials all over the country, and the message is insanely different in Michigan than it is in Pennsylvania. And it's coming down to the Israel question, and it's just really kind of bonkers when you think about it, because I think this is actually part of, it's impressive that they covered this on CNN, but it's wild in that you realize we don't really know who she is. I mean, here we are in the 11th hour, and it's like, wait, does she really like or not like Israel? Let's listen to it.
Mixed messages. A K-File investigation this hour finds Kamala Harris is targeting crucial battleground voters with vastly different messages on Gaza and Israel. This ad is running in Michigan, which has the largest Arab population in America.
What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
All right, well, it's a very different story for an ad in Pennsylvania targeting Jewish voters.
Let me be clear. I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7th.
Different message. Andrew Kaczynski is out front now. So, Andrew, those obviously.
So Andrew goes on to explain that, yes, indeed, very, very, very different message. I want to go back to Rob and just get his reaction on that. So, here we are on the eve of the election. It's like, where is she really on not just the Israel issue, but the economy? I mean, I get it. She's like, oh yeah, inflation is too high. She blames grocery stores for that and the producers for that, as opposed to her Inflation Reduction Act for that. And you don't really kind of, is she for fracking or is she against fracking? Well, right now she's for fracking because you see she's down in Pennsylvania. So at least with Donald Trump, people are like, okay, there's some consistency there. He's kind of had the same exact message for the last 30 years.
Yeah, he's not two-faced. I don't think I've heard that. I've heard a lot of him called a lot of names, but two-faced is not really a name that's applied to him, but it certainly would apply to her. I think that's a big part of her problem is that she'll say anything and people, to get votes, or depending on she'll change her accent, depending on the audience and depending on the situation. I was stunned by she won't even express how she intended to vote on that proposition in California related to what is it, like if you get in trouble or not for stealing $1,000 worth of merchandise, that she withheld comment on that. It's like as if it was somehow a violation of ethics to reveal your position on a political matter. It's
this has been the criticism of her. I mean, don't forget that she wouldn't do any media interviews initially, and it was all so tightly controlled. And this was actually in the New York Times. They pointed out that the criticism of her as vice president by members of the Biden administration was that she was so risk adverse. The only issue that she would actually get out in front of was the abortion issue. Because it polled well with women, and she figured, okay, women are my ticket. But everything else, she was kind of tied in knots and tried very hard to script everything. I mean, I think it was actually her downfall. I think if she had gotten out there earlier on, by the way, if she had gotten out there as vice president, for goodness sakes, it was just, you had too many handlers trying to control the narrative because they were so scared of the internet and so scared of authenticity. And Trump's like, okay, Mr. Authentic, he's getting out there and speaking for 3 hours at these rallies, and he's saying stuff that sometimes, maybe if he had had a prompter and a script, he may not have said just exactly that way because it can be taken out of context so quickly. And that's what they were afraid of with her. But then by not allowing her out there, Americans really didn't meet her. I don't think she met herself. I don't think she knows where she is on any of these issues other than one. And that's coming back to bite her. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens again tomorrow. But just looking at the data points that are coming in and the fact that Pennsylvania is up for grabs by Donald Trump, it tells me she's not a gifted politician in any way, shape, or form.
And, maybe the core problem is that she actually is, if she were truthful about her positions and her views, they would be deeply unpopular with the vast majority of Americans. And you look at her voting record, and she's a real California leftist politician. And, the more you kind of convey that to the people, they might, but they're not going to support you, in the voting booth. And so she's really been hiding that. And,
I want to go to a comment made by Peace of My Mind, who says, and this is smart. Let me see if I can get it on there. Oh, this is tech challenge, Trish. But you know why you can't see it? You can't see it because it is in black. But Peace of My Mind, I'll just read it. Kamala has no plan on shore energy production. He's criticizing her policy. No plan to decrease government spending. No, actually, I'd argue she's going to increase it as much as she can. That's why we like gold. All right, Kamala was able to spend time to be on SNL, Peace of Mind writes, but wasn't able to find time to be interviewed with Rogan. And I think that this is part of what I'm saying, right? She is so scripted and tightly wound and polling all the time. And then you got this guy who's just out there talking and doing this gut check on everything. And people are like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Versus word salad.
Yeah, no, she wouldn't be able to survive Rogan. I mean, a deep dive, honest interview, pulling her real views out of her, that would be, she was probably smart to avoid that one. I don't know if she could have made it through that.
Peace of My Mind making the point that I need some white background letters with white letters. I agree with you. Unfortunately, Peace of My Mind, they didn't update on this software, so that's going to require a little bit of a deep dive on my part to try and figure out how to do that. TCC making the point that Biden won 2020 on absolutely zero policy as well. I agree, but here's the thing. It's different now. because we have the reality of horrible inflation, right, Rob? I mean, the last nearly 4 years, and we've seen prices just go through the roof. And so people don't have as much money, don't have much in the way of spending power compared to what they used to have. And they're like, okay, well, that didn't work out so well for us. And now you want us to elect this woman who was part of the team that drove my household income down, at least from a purchasing power perspective?
Yeah, you have a pretty calamitous record in terms of the economy, and she's basically the incumbent. And let's not forget, with Trump, we had, COVID, and he was the incumbent. It wasn't necessarily his fault, but
they might have blamed him for it.
Yeah, they blame
especially
him for it.
Especially when the economy shut down and everything shut down, and small business owners were like, "What the heck? Home Depot stays open, but I can't."
Yeah, and I think you can't just put enough emphasis on the fact that the voting procedures were drastically changed in 2020, leading to massive, numbers of mail-in ballots and historically high voter participation. So, it's really procedurally, it's a very different election this time than it was 4 years ago. And I think the changes, benefit the Republicans. Also, the Republicans were caught off guard, by those changes. They didn't take advantage of the new voting procedures the way that, the Democrats were able to,
Well, yeah, and I think
advantage.
Republicans are really, and I bet you the majority of my viewers, certainly on the Trish Regan show, would still argue that we shouldn't be doing all this mail-in stuff. I know you and I have talked in the past about when you think of the technology that we have available to us as a nation, we ought to be able to figure this out a little bit better in terms of at least making everybody have a little bit more peace of mind about the voting process. But all that said, look, the Democrats historically have just been better at mail-in ballots. Like, that has been their sweet spot. And in 2020, there was a lot of pushback in many, many different directions. I mean, this is so different than 2020. You also have Lara Trump running the show at the RNC right now, and she's come right out and said, listen, two can play that game, and we need to be better at ballot harvesting than they are. And so the fact is, now you have Republicans that are actually engaging in this in a way that historically has never happened. And so that's meaningful too.
We're starting to see that in the numbers. I mean, definitely more early votes, from registered Republicans coming through. So she seems to have been laser focused and successful at fixing the real, the ballot operations, right? And those sort of that hand-to-hand combat need to really prevail in this kind of, with these rules.
It's amazing. Listen, I want to just encourage everyone, if you have not subscribed to this channel, make sure you do. We are going to be here live until the bitter end. Well, we'll see. We'll see. It could be a long one, and I don't want to keep everybody up all night, but it is going to be a really exciting evening. Rob and I have you covered. He's a complete math whiz, so he'll be running through all the possible iterations of where we're going and how we're getting there. And we're going to be bringing in all kinds of live material all over the country. Let's hope that things are very peaceful and there's not that much to talk about, and that it's an early evening and we know the winner by 9 o'clock, okay? Or at least by 11. But anything could happen. So we want to be here with you for it. We are, of course, as you know, 76 Research. And I paired with Rob on 76 Research because he's the smartest investor I know, and I mean that. And my hope was that we could bring more and more of his intellect and success on Wall Street to you guys. So that's what this model is about. If you go to 76research.com, just sign up for the free stuff, if nothing else, and make sure that you get that, because we're here trying to help you. And we have a new guide coming out very soon, actually, on sort of the 101 on investing. And for those of you that are, I can't do it, I can't afford it, I would just say, listen, you can't afford not to. You've got to try and really rethink your budgeting so that you have some left over to be putting into, frankly, the equity markets, but also bonds, as gold as well. There's a lot of different approaches, but there are some good companies out there for the long haul, and we hope to be able to help you find them. Certainly, proof is in the pudding, and our portfolio over the last 3 months shows a median stock price increase of over 10% versus somewhere around 5 and change there in the S&P. So that stuff matters. And then some of the biggies, some of the standouts have really, right, Rob, stood out. And we've had some real great picks. Just to show the graphic here on screen, you can see the median stock in our portfolios up 10.8% versus the S&P up 5.9%. And again, you can see like the consumer pick, the financial pick. Those are really some exciting things to be looking at. And so we're going to have more on the election. We're going to have more on the markets. I'll be joined again by my colleague, Rob Horton, again tomorrow night. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Go to 76research.com, subscribe to our research, and we will see you here. Thanks so much.